For thousands of years, people fought infection, calmed inflammation, and survived illness without a single pharmaceutical drug. They were not helpless. They were not guessing. They had plants. And that knowledge is still here, hidden inside the most widely read book in human history. Not a prophecy, not a parable, a survival manual written in plants. Some of these plants moved through the ancient world like currency, carried across deserts, burned in temples, pressed into wounds on battlefields. One of them was used to treat a dying king. The remedy is still in the text, word for word, 3,000 years later. Several of them are now being studied by modern researchers for inflammation, heart health, mood, and pain. Not all equally, but enough to make the pattern hard to ignore. And yet, almost nobody talks about them anymore. Not because the ancient world imagined them, and not because every one of them failed modern scrutiny, but because somewhere between sacred tradition, modern medicine, and everything that got lost in between, this knowledge stopped being seen for what it was. Welcome to my channel. Every video unearths one more secret they forgot to bury deeper. Around 701 BC, a king named Hezekiah lay dying in Jerusalem. The account is preserved in the book of Isaiah against a historical backdrop also reflected in Assyrian records from the same period. And in that account, a severe illness is met with a strikingly specific intervention. Isaiah does not prescribe prayer alone. He prescribes figs, a poultice of figs, applied directly to the boil. The king recovers. That detail has survived for nearly 3,000 years. And it does not read like mythology. It reads like a remembered treatment. But Hezekiah was not an isolated case. He was part of a civilization that had been accumulating plant knowledge for centuries. Around 65 AD, a Greek physician named Dioscorides, traveling with the Roman army, compiled what would become one of the most influential medical reference works of the ancient world. In De Materia Medica, he described the medicinal use of hundreds of plants, including olive, frankincense, myrrh, garlic, saffron, and mint. Many of the same substances also appear in scripture. Dioscorides did not invent their uses. He recorded practices that had already been circulating across the ancient world for generations. And the same plants keep appearing. Across Egypt, Arabia, Persia, and the wider Mediterranean world, resins, oils, spices, and herbs moved through temples, markets, royal courts, and sick rooms. They were expensive, they were protected, they were remembered. When archaeologists opened the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922, they found sealed vessels among the royal treasures. Some accounts suggest traces of resinous substances, possibly alongside oils used in burial preparation. Whether or not every detail of that evidence holds up perfectly today, the broader pattern is clear. In the ancient world, plant resins and oils were considered valuable enough to accompany a king into eternity. That is the world the Bible emerged from. A world where food was not just food, where oil was not just oil, where resin was not just fragrance. A plant could be sacred, medicinal, economic, and symbolic all at once. And the people who used it did not treat those categories as separate. They returned to these plants because, over generations, experience taught them that some of them worked often enough to be remembered, traded, protected, and written into the most copied document in human history. Modern science did not set out to validate ancient scripture. It set out to study plants. And what it found across decades of research is difficult to ignore. Several of the most prominent plants associated with the biblical world show real, measurable biological activity. Not all equally, not magically, but enough to make the pattern worth taking seriously. Olive oil sits at the center of one of the most studied dietary patterns in cardiovascular medicine. Mediterranean-style diets built around it have been consistently linked with lower cardiovascular risk in large-scale research. This is mainstream nutrition science, and olive oil has been pressed, eaten, and anointed with in this region since deep antiquity. Frankincense comes from the boswellia tree. Modern research has identified boswellic acids as compounds with meaningful anti-inflammatory potential. The NCCIH notes that boswellia may help with osteoarthritis pain. Not miracle medicine, but an ancient resin with genuine modern relevance. Garlic is even less glamorous, which almost makes it more convincing. Meta-analyses support modest but repeatable reductions in blood pressure and LDL cholesterol, small effects. Consistent effects, the kind that keep showing up across independent studies. Peppermint oil has shown short-term benefits for IBS, symptom relief in clinical trials. A specific, modern, clinically relevant finding for a plant from the same herb culture that appears in the biblical world thousands of years ago. Pomegranate shows plausible vascular and anti-inflammatory benefits in modern reviews. The strongest evidence points toward cardiovascular and metabolic health, which makes it quietly remarkable that this fruit appears throughout ancient Near Eastern art and scripture as a symbol of life and abundance. Saffron may be the most unexpected entry. Recent meta-analyses find it promising for mild to moderate depression and anxiety, a precious biblical spice with possible modern relevance for mood. And aloe, mentioned in the burial preparation of Jesus in the Gospel of John, has supportive evidence for topical wound and burn care, not a cure-all, but enough to explain why a plant like this could survive in human memory for centuries. These are the strongest examples, and together they point to something bigger than coincidence. Because once certain plants survive both ancient memory and modern scrutiny, a different question begins to emerge. Who decided this knowledge no longer mattered? Nobody banned these plants. No single law erased them overnight. But they did not have to. In 1994, the United States passed DSHEA, a law that locked herbal products into a strange position, widely sold, but largely cut off from the medical claims that require expensive clinical proof. And expensive proof only makes sense when there is money to recover on the other side. That is where the real culprit enters. Not one villain, a model. A medical economy built around what can be patented, scaled, and monetized. You cannot patent a fig tree. You cannot own a garlic bulb. You cannot file an exclusive claim on frankincense after thousands of years of open use. There is no billion-dollar incentive to prove that something ancient, cheap, and widely available still has value. So, the research gap widened, not because these plants were useless, because many of them were commercially inconvenient. In a system where evidence follows funding and funding follows ownership, plants without owners were always going to fall behind. And the institutions followed the economics. By the 20th century, older plant knowledge had been pushed into a lower category, not disproven, reclassified, from medicine into folklore, from treatment into tradition. These plants did not disappear because they failed. They disappeared because they succeeded without permission. The knowledge is not gone, the plants are not extinct, and for most of them, access was never really the problem. Olive oil is still everywhere, garlic is still in the kitchen, peppermint, pomegranate, aloe, saffron, cumin, coriander, mustard, onion, cinnamon, cassia, rue, grapes. None of these belong to a lost civilization. They are still moving quietly through everyday life. So, start there. Not with supplements, not with a complete lifestyle overhaul, with what is already in reach. Use extra virgin olive oil as your primary cooking fat. Add garlic regularly to your food. Brew peppermint as tea for digestive support. Eat pomegranate. Use aloe topically for cuts and burns. Cook with coriander, cumin, cinnamon, and mustard, not just for flavor, but with the awareness that these plants have never fully separated from medicine. That is not a radical act. It is a return, because the line between food and medicine was never as clean as the modern world pretended, not in the biblical world, and not entirely now. These plants survived trade collapses, empires, and a century that taught people to trust only what came in a bottle with a label. They are still here, and you do not need anyone's permission to look at them differently. The most widely read book in human history has been studied for thousands of years, and the plants inside it are still growing. Nobody had to hide them. Nobody had to bury them. They just had to wait for someone to stop reading past them.